Hello, and welcome back to another Northstar Plays Hearthstone 4, Got the Damon, single player US Communist Democratic Socialist specifically run. Um, I don't like that it calls all of it communist because really Democratic Socialist is Marxist. Communist in the common American parlance refers to Marxist Leninists, although in other languages, including Swedish, which is paradox. Maybe different. I guess I'll have to learn that because maybe trying to get out of the U.S. with concerns that I'd say within 30 years, there's a 20% chance of it going fascist. And I'm being conservative. It's probably worse than that, so can't afford to stay here. Of course, I need to get my YouTube channel to where I'm making money first because no country wants someone who can't support themselves. And then I guess I live in Sweden and string games that include a lot of paradox games to the English speaking world because I won't speak Swedish well enough for it anytime soon. But, that'll bring in ad money from essentially, I don't know, maybe it'd be nice if that were possible because I'd rather not be where things are bad. Um, I have long COVID. For those of you new to my channel, disabled it. It sucks. Limits the things I can do. Um, makes it hard for me to focus very often. Hold on one sec. Sorry, issues with my glasses, which I've issues with because, well, poverty, not be able to get a good pair due to being unable to work due to long COVID, and the U.S. government screwed me at SSDI because the work I did was for grad was when I was a grad student for the university, so it was payroll tax exempt because exemption in the 90s, specifically just to make it harder to qualify for SSDI. Something Bill Clinton signed off, gave to Newt Gingrich, the head of the House, of the GOP House at the time. Uh, One of the many things that was sold out for higher taxes to balance the budget, only for Bush to turn around and cut taxes and massively drive up the debt, undoing any good that was achieved by that. And something that Clinton probably foresaw. He had to know future presidents, but he just wanted an excuse to cut welfare programs and pretend it was for a good cause because Clinton was basically a Republican in disguise, which is, yeah, a problem with America. I've been looking back at history, learning stuff. It's particularly relevant to this time period for the United States because, well, if I'm playing, I should know a little. The 1940 elections, when FDR ran against Wilkie, the GOP candidate at the time, actually proposed something which the game calls Wilkie's New Deal, a set of programs which, while less aggressive in terms of things to stimulate employment and help people suffering from the Great Depression, were still very aggressive for a Republican by today's standards. Of course, back then the Republicans are much more liberal and the Democrats more conservative usually. I mean, Theodore Roosevelt was a Republican after all. Um, FDR was a Democrat, of course, and it's when things started to change under him. Wilson was a Democrat, but he was an old Dixiecrat, racist Democrat, imperialist, and more like a Republican today. Um, so it's really with FDR that started to become what it is. Um, but FDR proposed, well, a couple things. So Wookiee's New Deal. Wookiee also supported Lend-Lease to Britain, which meant that both parties did in the 1940 election, which made it not an issue. Uh, some historians have credited this with winning World War II. I think that's overstatement. The British would have won the Battle of Britain without American lease. It would have been harder, would have cost a lot more British lives, but there was just no way the Germans could have ever won it. That air war campaign was doomed from the start, partly because the Germans didn't have the capability to train enough replacement pilots, didn't have the rubber and such to build enough replacement aircraft. There was just no freaking way the Nazis could have, it didn't have the oil to keep it up. There was just no way they could win that. Anyways, never mind the industrial capacity to produce enough fighters or technology for aircraft that had a long enough range. You get the idea. for Hearts Iron player, it's quite understandable why it was doomed. But Wilkie and FDR discussed creating a new third party that would have replaced, well, it would have usurped the existing two-party system in the United States and driven realignment of the other parties, which they hoped would merge into one and they'd be just different two parties. FDR hoped to call it the Liberal Party, and it would have been the left wing of the Democrats and the Republicans, united among more progressive economic issues. Um, Unfortunately, a member of his administration or an embedded reporter leaked this to the media. Um, Media made a circus of it, and more than that, intentionally tried to submarine it because even in this time period, it turns out the U.S. corporate media was very much involved in politics and playing kingmaker. I guess I shouldn't be surprised since Hearst, father of yellow journalism, was running Mussolini's column, was running a column for Mussolini in Chicago in one of his newspapers until the outbreak until the United States entered World War II. So until Pearl Harbor, he was literally doing giving Mussolini a newspaper column, which was probably written by one of Mussolini's advisors, but still ridiculous. The media was very much controlled by the elites, had a strong right wing bias, and worked to submarine this. And then FDR wrote a letter to Wilkie apologizing about the leak, and that too was leaked. So there were members in his administration who were probably trying to submarine this, as well as the media playing along. Did not happen. Could have changed American history for the better. Um, More left wing politics that would have prevented all the good that FDR did from probably being usurped and would have ended at least the dominance of existing two parties, which had already, by this point in American history, become toxic, stratified, and unwilling to change. The Democrats really needed to die, and FDR was aware of this. This is why he was trying to change it. They were the oldest party. The GOP, though, had become pretty ossified as well. It's worse today, but it was really a huge problem even back then. FDR's vice president from 40 to 44, well, technically he didn't take office to 41 with the after the 40 elections till um, 45, just based on the way the terms work. But I mean, sorry, is it to 45? Well, to early 45 before. No, because yeah, it would have been. It was till the 44 elections, so it would have been till early 45. But FDR died in late 44 after the election, so yeah, this is an interesting one, but I have to look at the exact timeline. I think Henry Aggood Wallace, who was his vice president, might have actually still been sitting, but not taken over as president because the election already happened. Truman was going to be the vice president, or it already. I'm not exactly sure how it worked. Maybe he resigned early, but Wallace, who was Secretary of Agriculture and then became vice president in 1940, um, was or unless yeah, it was 40. Was sidelined in a rigged Democratic Party convention in 1944, um, where the party bosses didn't allow votes to happen when the delegates wanted them to bribe delegates with jobs to not vote the way their constituents want them, and intimidated and bullied and threatened people even. I mean, this is back when the Democrat Party was in bed with the mafia and was deeply, deeply corrupt. Back then, the Republicans were the party of, well, law and order. I guess that part hasn't changed. Um, but yeah, of course, it didn't have the racist undertones because, Lincoln was a Republican. Now it has racist undertones, and we can owe those racist undertones in large part to Nixon. Um, Anyways, and actually, one of the people ran for president before Nixon who lost, actually really started that. Henry A. Good Wallace, when he was sidelined like this, he actually ran in 48 against Truman with a third party, the Progressive Party. There was also Dixiecrats, which were a racist Southern Democrat party. So there were actually four parties running well, two breakaway partisan Democrats. There may have been some other third parties in 1948. Unfortunately, because the U.S. political system is rigged into terms of only allowing two parties with winner take all. Spoiler effect means that only about 3.5% of people voted for the Progressive Party, which is the one that Wallace created. Could have been way more if people weren't afraid that that would hand victory to the Republicans. Uh, so the system was broken way more than I thought even back then. And if Wallace had won, there wouldn't have been the Cold War because he wanted to undo what Truman did. Truman, remember, never should have been president because the Raid Convention made him vice president. Then FDR died. That made it Truman president. If and actually, the vast majority of Democratic voters had wanted Wallace to be the vice president, 44. So if the delegates hadn't been, in many cases, unfaithful, we would have seen, and there are also issues with how delegates are signed by states, but so that made it closer and easier for the party bosses to rig. But it was because of unfaithful delegates, ones who didn't vote the way that they had promised they would vote before going to the convention, that led to this outcome. This is part of what led to more modern primaries and reforms to try and prevent something like this happening, by the way, in the future. Of course, we all know there have been problems with the Democratic primaries again since, particularly with how Bernie Sanders was treated in the future. But Wallace tried to undo the U.S. starting the Cold War, which was something that was undemocratically foisted on the American public. Um, Unfortunately, the Progressive Party they created actually ran again to try and do the same thing in '52, but by that point McCarthyism was starting to emerge, and so people who called into question the Cold War were being freaking thrown in jail basically, which is extremely undemocratic. So it makes me feel a little less bad about having this asshole Bowder as an advisor. Bowder was an apologist for the genocide of the Native Americans, basically arguing that the United States could change the world already and had the potential to change a lot more, and so that was worth having that happen. I disagree. I think it was perfectly possible for the United States to grow without murdering all the Native Americans, and could have more fully and equally integrated them into society instead of sticking them on reservations and allowing settlers to kill so many. There were definitely much better ways of the U.S. It was going to conquer, but it didn't have to mass murder the people who were there. Um, Things like the Trail of Tears in Jackson. I mean, the Trail of Tears was actually done to a group of Native Americans that was highly integrated into American society, was engaged in sedentary farming, had developed a written language because they hadn't had one until a, a particular scholar leader of their um, one of the tribes had actually went to university and ended up in English obviously, and ended up developing written language for his tribe. So Trail of Tears was a particular atrocity. Andrew Jackson did that. That was what, 1832. But I'm pointing to Florida here because that's where people who were resettled originally came from. Is, if I remember correctly, the Panhandle of Florida. They were sent way up to reservation inland. Um, Mass murder, trail of tears, all these things didn't have to happen. Bowder was an asshole. But uh, looking into the politics of Dewey, who was an anti-communist, early pre-McCarthyist bastard. He's the guy who ran in '48 against Truman. Looking into the way that Wilkie, who was actually a very good guy, GOP candidate in 1940, I obviously still prefer FDR, but Wilkie wouldn't have been a terrible president. Looking at the way that the system evolved, I can say the system is much more deeply flawed, and the U.S. communist path seems even more unrealistic than I thought because of how much power the elites had. One more thing, by the way, I have long COVID, so I forget to say stuff, but I did reallocate some aircraft, and I want to say on the issue of my long COVID. I know I jump around and difficultly focusing. Um, it's something that a lot of people want to forget about because the COVID was a terrible time. A lot of people felt almost like the world was ending, so they just want to forget that time. But that's not how you deal with the past and something traumatic like that. You deal with the past by honoring those who died, because a lot of people lost loved ones and such due to the pandemic. And it wasn't just old people, there were little marathon runners who dropped dead of heart attacks while in the hospital with COVID infections, because it's a terrible disease that causes heart attacks and strokes. And with long COVID, that elevated risk, well, less than the really severe acute infections of the hospital, that stays with you forever. Um, you honor that and you deal with that by helping the survivors, like, the people who lost loved ones and the people who were disabled with long COVID, and working to make sure something like that never happens again. Just like you deal with the Holocaust by making sure that never ever happens again. You don't go the opposite way and further victimize the people who developed long COVID by screwing them over, ignoring them, erasing them, just like, you don't freaking deal with the Holocaust by committing another genocide, which is what many argue, and I would say is largely true of what Israel's doing. I say largely true because it may not meet the technical definitions of genocide, but it does meet the definitions of ethnic cleansing, which is, a couple points down the scale, but it's still a crime against humanity. And sometimes there's not much point arguing over those words. And there have been, multiple other genocides, uh, notably the Bangladeshi genocide, which the Israelis actually supported. So they, even if you want to argue they didn't mass murder Palestinians, I mean, they have mass murder, but even if you argue they're not genociding Palestinians, they definitely engaged in supporting genocide in Bangladesh, and they are doing ethnic cleansing now. Um, but that's just one example. Unfortunately, history is full of victims becoming victimizers, and it's full of people dealing trauma by screwing over survivors of that trauma. So dealing with COVID by screwing over the survivors because it reminds them of that past. That's not how you should deal with it. All right. Anyways, oh yeah, I reassigned some generals, by the way, just little things. And I spent some time thinking about. I had done a couple fast forwards to see like AI pass. Great brains, sometimes they go Axis, sometimes they don't. But Mexico eventually, I should have realized this in the multiplayer game. This happened, but obviously the other Joe wasn't going to screw me. They take liberate the Antilles, demands I withdraw from Puerto Rico. If I don't give Puerto Rico independence, they get a war goal on me. They attack me. The AI does. Joe didn't. Um, when that eventually happens, that actually won't be for quite a while. So I may have been panicking a little bit about same defensive divisions on the border with Mexico, but I'll let them train. It'll take a long time to reach regular. I'll keep adding more slowly. I'll probably annex Baja, create a independent democratic Mexico, because by that point they'll be communist, in Sonora, and create a supervised state on the coast in a couple states. Couple states because even though this may lead to fewer extra build slots, the AI is terrible at building infrastructure, and they can have this 6 infrastructure from their 2 infrastructure focuses with the generic tree. And supervised state becomes independent and has the same ideology as Mexico, which when I flip communist, supervised state will start getting communist drift instead of democratic. So they'll eventually end up communist. When they're independent and communist, they'll merge with Mexico again. Sonora, on the other hand, at some point, I could use spies to turn them communist, or I could invade them and force communist, or just puppet them and have a Sonoran puppet. I've even talked with Joe about doing something similar in the multiplayer game, except instead of a supervised state down the coast, to be Baja supervised, still Sonora Democratic, because these 2 states have very little population, so they're the best to break off for extra industry. Baja, I want to either annex or have supervised, because it's a great place for naval search radar to better maintain naval supremacy along the Mexican coast and locate subs in the multiplayer game, in this game, not in the multiplayer game. In this game, Chile is going fascist, so I'm worried I could eventually face Chilean naval raiders here. Or that they might give docking rights to the Nazis, at least, like Franco historically did. They take the Francoist model. So while they may remain neutral, they may gain docking rights to Nazi subs, which means they could be doing raiding here on my convoys that go this way to provide supply the West Coast. There's also an air base in Tijuana, so in Baja California, so it can help me control the sea here. The Western Canal Zone I'll have to control from the Panama Canal Air Base and set up another naval search radar there, which this is the location for these two sea zones. So yeah, Baja's for radar. Sonora is a very low population state that can add industry, and a couple coastal areas, well, at least one needs to be coastal for naval focus, but Durango and Jalisco probably make supervised states because, well, I can get the tungsten. I don't have a ton of it. Oh, I still have some even with, it's actually steel I'm tighter on. I guess I could do Guerrero, which actually has less population, but wonder if I could contest the British oil rights here. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Communist Mexico usually nationalizes the oil fields, but Guerrero and guess I could do Durango, or maybe all three states. The point, oh, this one doesn't have any naval bases. So maybe it's disconnected, these two states. The point is to have a supervised state, which would end up in my faction, obviously, and give me docking rights. It's my puppet. It's a puppet that gains autonomy very quickly. That can provide some repair for any convoy escort destroyers I have here. Supply also from the naval bases, supply and repairs for any destroyers that get damaged in skirmishes with surface raiders or hit by enemy nav or such. So it's all about controlling this sea zone. Because I could end up facing a big navy if I end up at war with the British. Alright. Wow. Strategy discussed. Music time. Game time. Yeah, I set this division. It only needs 2 days to train to regular, so I'm just going to do it. While they continue getting planning, I don't need to attack immediately. I redistribute these guys to Clark so that I could hear Bradley's the best guy to lead the troops because higher defense skill. And there's actually a chance of crits during the daytime. Pretty good chance. 60 attack versus 48 defense for the auxiliary divisions. So the engineer brigade actually that can avoid crits. Well, I guess engineers are great for high defense. Crits are, I think, explained if enemy attack that targets division, and there's a randomization factor, but if that final attack value, which is something like the attack value C plus or minus up to 20%, if it exceeds defense, any points that in excess of defense deal 4 times the strength and organization damage, so makes a big difference. That's why defense is actually more valuable than attack. If attack and defense are close to match, but you're suffering a few crits, and you're on the defense. Breakthrough is more valuable in attack when attacking, usually, for the same reason. There's a whole thing with like engineer divisions are, supply or companies are often hated because they don't provide high attack stat or whatever, and people test them and they say they suck, but they're always testing with high width divisions. But use them on our very low width divisions so they don't suffer crits when they otherwise would do their low width. On bigger divisions, if they're adequately supplied, you don't need engineers at all unless you're just trying to get a little extra soft attack for the width. That's just why auxiliaries don't have crits, but my elite divisions do, and engineer brigades, which are smaller divisions, all of them only have engineers. I don't bother with artillery because I don't have enough to go around. If I did, I'd give them both engineers and artillery, maybe. Although they're less organized in the bigger divisions, so I do prefer to keep the artillery in the biggest ones where it hits the hardest. I'm only 75 artillery pieces short, huh? Okay, it's less than I thought, but I'm also not producing artillery again yet. Focusing on rifles, which I have a massive shortfall of. More cost effective. Yeah, I'm also gonna need rifles for garrisons soon enough. I actually have these garrisons fully equipped. They're using some higher quality rifles. I prefer they used obsolete, but garrisons are higher priority than anything else almost. Since I don't really, I've set them, I don't really do raids right now, obviously, or operations. Supply trucks obviously are not competing for rifles, so yeah, my garrisons should get rifles preferentially. Capture Little Rock soon, and yeah, I need to get the rifles that. Well, no, I'll get that when I capture it. When I could suffer resistance at rifles to replace. Boom. If I suffer resistance, destroys some rifles, I'll just replace with Sorry, headphones fell off. Not the best headphones. They're already showing their wear, and on top of it, my hair's kind of longer as a way to save money. I also want to donate it, but since I always get constantly my car is taken by family so I can get to work, so it's hard to actually get to where I need to go. Or you're at the place to donate my hair for wigs for, cancer patient kids. It is long enough for that now, so yeah, long-haired. Some people may call me a commie, even though I've explained before I'm a democratic socialist. I'm aware of some of the biases and stereotypes people say about me. Cool. Yeah, I should do that, especially because this has more factories below it. Q. Switch off New York when it gets close on. I feel like there's something I'm missing, but I always do with my long code. I can never remember what I'm forgetting. I mean, I guess that's life partly. You never remember what you're forgetting, but I know there's something I'm forgetting. Who's Nazi fighters are showing up in the Gulf Coast? That's gonna be a problem. I don't need so much CAS. These guys are still building mission efficiency, not actually. No, they actually are running bombing runs. But if they're fighters intercepting, I'm gonna want the more heavily armed aircraft to be. And air superiority aircraft. Air superiority should probably just be there, dogfighting wherever. Distracting hits from the stuff that can bomb. They can't even reach this area, Everyone's going here then. Um, if you look at, and I cannot take the time to explain this all, so I'll just say look at the wiki for air combat. You'll see that there's a whole field for disruption negation, which is based on mainly the speed. I mean, not the speed, sorry. Yeah, speed affects how many attacks are taken, though. Speed advantage. It's based on the defense and the attack of the aircraft that's doing a ground mission, such as close air support. So putting forward-facing fighter armaments on a CAS will actually reduce its disruption in a contested air zone, as well as shoot down some enemy aircraft on rare occasions. Usually they don't have the agility for that. You don't do it to shoot down fighters, you do it to prevent disruption. Ball turrets obviously also have some add defense and attack to aircraft. Defense means fear gets shot down, attack means won't reduce the rate that the CAS gets shot down, but will reduce the rate it gets disrupted. So that's why it gives it attack, besides meaning that actually shoots some aircraft down. Defense, probably to represent that the aircraft are harder to approach with the ball turrets. But yeah, sometimes you only have just enough weight for like one pair of light machine guns. You can't add more bombs. You might as well, in that case, add a pair of light machine guns. They'll reduce disruption. It's particularly valuable for dive bombers and, well, not for dive bombers. Actually, it's most valuable for TAC, for medium tactical bombers, because they'll get disrupted more because they're slower. And they tend to carry heavier bomb loads than dive bombers, so they also make more of a difference if they're not disrupted. But yeah, still often worth putting defense turrets and CAS just to reduce disruption. And, well, I'm not sure I'd often build forward-facing machine guns if they already have them, like the A12s here. Or is it? Yep, A12s. If they already have them, I'm not going to. Is the redeployment? They just haven't arrived yet. I was wondering why they're still there. I'm not going to just say that's useless or stupid. It actually has some value. It just might not be worth the cost of producing more like that. Especially the weight's often better used on more bombs instead of forward-facing machine guns, and dive brakes and armor plating and self-sealing fuel tanks instead of ball turrets on CAS. And stuff to extend range, especially to offset armor plates, but also just so you have enough range to cover the air zones. If you don't have enough range, that's always the most important thing. Because it allows fewer, more expensive aircraft to provide the same effectiveness as more cheaper ones. So that makes it cost effective to add all sorts of other things that are more expensive, like self-sealing fuel tanks. To put on more bombs because you won't be producing as many bombs because you'll have fewer aircraft to provide the same coverage. It's because mission efficiency, like here it's only 38.5, so that means I get effectively 38.5 CAS if I have 100. Which is to say, I need a lot more aircraft to cover the area because they lack the range. Once they're fully used the mission, they lose 59% of their efficiency, so they're less than half as effective. Something with the range to cover the whole zone would be. Shoot, that was what it was. It was that destroyer. I may have had a little overflow. Well. can make up for arbitrarily losing probably one or two. Okay, I was like, it's slowing down because, yeah, the Soviets' civil war has begun. That means I've just lost all the Soviet volunteers, though, which were in a couple key places. Kind of sucks, but still have the Italian ones. Can't close this even? Oh well. Let's have that. Reinforcements have arrived. Switch these guys to Clark. They'll actually plan faster under him anyways. The real reason is switch these guys to Bradley so they don't suffer crits when join the fight. Also makes for fewer arrows in the area, easier to read. Otherwise, I have to constantly check in the battle, see when Clark's guys get pulled in, switch them then. No reason not to do it early. Except that maybe that Bradley's slightly better at logistics and down Texas. Supply issues, so. So I'm trying to take San Antonio for its supply hub, as well as the fact that it'll actually be enough to tip me to have majority control of the state. So, multiple reasons. Oh, the AI put in that last division. Bradley is executing this plan. It's actually the last plan the AI is auto-executing. There's other ones, I guess. Most of my own doing. These guys really should help there. Soviet Civil War. Once again, there is open fighting in Soviet Russia. This time, however, it is not a war between Bolsheviks and whites, but rather a war between rivaling factions within the Communist Party. Joseph Stalin holds the capital, while the rebels, led by Dmitry Lyshenko, are based around Archangel. Archangelsk. Rumors are circling that Dmitry Lyshenko's rebellion is sponsored by foreign powers, but the way those rumors remain to be seen. Those rumors are false because they did the POUM thing. So even though that's how you get a Stalinist versus communist civil war, it's the only way you can. They can be true. There's a focus they can take, but it's mutually exclusive. So there's no foreign aid to to the rebellion. It's 50% chance of the rumors being true, basically. It's like, if assuming it's 50-50 of either path. And France joins the Czech Entente. Earlier today, the Czechoslovak Republic and France issued a joint statement, blah, blah. It's a generic. This will be useful. Also, Romania, I think, is guaranteeing Czechoslovakia. So when the Nazis attack, 4 countries will all come to the aid of the Czechs. Unfortunately, they'll probably all get steamrolled, but France should be able to hold out with the Maginot for quite a while and probably only lose when they push beyond it. And then a counterattack pushes through and gets through undefended Maginot provinces. Hopefully, I can join this faction. Once everyone else has surrendered, France will become the faction leader. By that point, Yeah, the Czechs aren't gonna say yes, and they're at peace right now. But I negotiate licenses though. For what it's worth. But the French, I think, will say yes. Once they're at war, they have a higher likelihood of acceptance. But I tested on one of the fast forwards and was able to. So I think, yeah, join the Czech Entente. Then all these faction members, they become governments in exile when they eventually get overrun, and I get free manpower, and I'm a defensive war against Nazis. And I'm able to intervene before all of Europe is controlled. Or at least start picking off Nazi subs in the Atlantic early. Deal with their naval raiding. Have tons of convoy escorts, you know. How's this red? 2 Nazi divisions attacking now. Oof. Doing crits to most all of the divisions, except maybe the 20th Infantry, if they're not concentrating their fire. Who are an elite assault division. Yeah, might get pushed back to Dallas. These guys kind of need to sit here and defend. Could attack these guys to give them multiple combat debuffs, though. Since they have planning, since they're attacking very harsh division, very good divisions. Also, probably want them to have more rifles first. So eventually, this fight will go on 11 days, though. So can't wait too long. Actually, can I? Alright. Effectively gave me some free repair, more than making up for. It's probably 1 or 2 dockyards that just disappeared into the void because of overflow in that destroyer. Even if you had, it's not just because I had 1 in the queue. You can have like 6 in the queue. Dockyards will disappear into the void. With the completion, there's no overflow on anything except convoys, which is dumb. It's implemented overflow on military factory production, but not naval dockyard production. Should be taking San Antonio soon. These guys have to reorganize and replan. Oof. All of these guys don't have much org. It's probably because they attacked before they'd organized, though. Yeah, these guys will help ensure have the org to attack here. Deal with any Nazi counterattacks, I guess. At least the weather's not bad. So the only thing I'm really repairing is the most important is the Lexington. My aircraft carrier. Which once these will be trained in about 10 days, actually. Should be able to put that as a strike force, and they can help deal with any Confederate cruisers, heavy cruisers that get involved in backing up convoy raiders. You know, naval casts and nav tends to focus on capital ships. Heavy cruisers are somewhat vulnerable. The U.S. in particular starts with some heavy cruisers that don't have a ton of anti-air. The U.K. does too. Of course, designs for better ones like the Wichita, which has plenty, but and historically, if I remember correctly, served as an anti-air cruiser at times. If you're trying to make anti-air cruisers game, you'd use heavy cruisers. Because capital ships be targeted a lot more. That heavy cruisers have more hit points than light, and they'll actually get targeted. Light cruisers almost always be ignored by enemy aircraft, so they draw fire away from the battleships and battle cruisers, which are bigger ships. So a crit's gonna make much more of a difference on them, and aircraft do a lot of crits. Also, more space for more gun emplacements in absolute terms, with lots of heavy cruisers that focus on anti-air. So if you're trying to get very high total fleet air value, because every ship gets some protection from every other ship that has anti-air guns and some from its own. Smaller fleets just deploy a few battle cruisers that are mostly focused on anti-air, but big fleets. Where's this naval battle? I don't see it. Oh, it's way up here. Okay. 4 Confederate subs. Where are the convoy escorts? Guess there is a response time on those. Here we go. Just an hour. And with the loading time of torpedoes being 3 to 4 hours, I guess that's enough. Just them not being present in the first hour margin reduces the chance of subs getting detected immediately. 2 of these destroyers were damaged already. I guess some exercises before, but yeah. Clemson's not the deep ocean, which I use Farragut's because can't put his main destroyers out here. I need the cruisers to have the task force have sufficient range to cover the mid-Atlantic. Farragut's better, they're faster destroyers. What I'm worried about is this Confederate strike force coming all the way out here and attacking the escorts. So Farragut's are a little bit better because they have better engines, so they're harder to hit than Clemson destroyers. At least for ship-to-ship combat, they're better. They can retreat faster if they need. 13 days on that. Oh. Italians are sending some air volunteers. They're helping Texas, huh? That's nice. Thank you, Italy. Well, for some of you wondering, eventually when I do my next campaign, it's likely at some point I might do an Italian fascist one. It can be quite overpowered, especially if you're doing like the Rome stuff and you turn on the Nazis. I did do a poll about what country to do next, and I got only 2 votes, but people were saying non-aligned. 2 isn't enough to really want to have that completely control me, but I may do it because 2 people bothered to apply. I was thinking Japan, doing a Japan Showa restoration run. Shogunate may have an easier time just throwing bodies at China and not caring about the manpower loss, but the Showa still usually sit enough war support to run total mobilization. They've tech faster than the Shogunate, and they built civilian factories faster, which is important for after you take China. Japan has a abysmal, like almost very little ability to do construction lines because that's so few civ. So you need to actually build some civ just so you can do infrastructure, air bases, and such in China. And usually, what you do strategically, a wise thing is to take some time to basically integrate China to build the logistics capacity like railroads and such. You need to project force, and then when you fight the Soviets, you doing it with good supply from in areas like Sinkiang and Manchuria. You may also fortify some areas with like level 2 land forts, so you don't have to invest as much in supply, and also divisions, fight better. Not as much because you can use smaller divisions to hold them, and they use less supply, obviously, so that in other areas you can push. Uh, and ultimately just taking time to do the Civ and then do more mill and get even more mill because long build up before you take on the Soviets in the East. You can join the Axis as non-aligned Japan, but you don't have to. They get people are complaining taking too much time. We get this stuff. Technological exchange. As you join the Axis and join the Axis research sharing group, basically. So, well, you could do it and just not. You don't have to meet actually declare war on the Soviets right away. Of course, you need control of like the Soviet Far East for your resource focus. Different ideologies get different ones. Fascists get one in China. Non-aligned get one in Eastern Russia. And I think north of Mongolia, where these states are. And communists actually get resources right in the Japanese home isles. I think the Democrat, I don't remember where they get it. It might be on one of like the island provinces. Or maybe they don't get one. Since Democratic is much more pacifist, and I guess if you're doing a player Democrat Japan, you'd probably join the Allies. Be less pressured for resources since you can import from the USA then if it's an historical game. I like focuses to add resources and factors to states. Probably a little too much. Induce focuses and they feel cool to take. Probably not always optimal, but I like to play with expensive equipment if I can afford it. You know, deploy lots of artillery, tanks, aircraft. It's kind of, I mean, power fantasy, it's often not optimal versus just pushing earlier with infantry. Okay. You know what? I'm getting sick of watching this. I'll get a little more breakthrough progress. Time to do improved radio. You don't get breakthrough progress, I don't think, instantly when you... That didn't just jump up, did it? I don't think so. I think it was 75.4% before. So it doesn't make sense to store all the way at 30 sometimes. Right, I did smoke generators. Which helps with ships retreating faster. It says fleet speed, but individual ships even. So damaged ships that decide to retreat without the rest of your task force. Or could have survived. Or small micro task forces, whatever. Point being, you'll lose fewer ships thanks to smoke generators. But I did it partly to expand my MIO, naval MIO. So rating MIO, so I don't have shell dies. I'd light to spend Navy XP to speed up. Well, lovely. Guess I can save 30 days in a computer machine. I don't care that much about nuclear research because I hope to have the war aside before nukes become relevant. Unlike in my multiplayer game where it'll be a much later World War II. Partly due to the way ideologies broke down. Be a late war with lots of inter-communist warfare, probably. Like a war between British and the Soviets if they end up in different factions, maybe. Certainly possibility of a war between Trotsky and Democratic Socialist U.S., over the issue of opposition parties and, having a less authoritarian leaning socialism. I hate to call socialism authoritarianism because it's a misnomer. Authoritarianism more properly refers to systems that are hierarchical and exclude population from political participation. It's not to say there wasn't strong state power, but the term is sometimes misused, at least in a more of a political science sense. It's a term that's bastardized to attack ideologies, countries the U.S. isn't like. Authoritarianism would be like the right-wing non-aligned in this game, and fascism, it would not be communism. Which is not to say, because one of the things about authoritarianism is it's not, as I said, political participation of the people. And instead the idea the authority is justified the fundamental tenet of authoritarianism is that authority is justified just because certain people have power, that they should be listened to because they have it. Because otherwise you'll have anarchy and chaos. Communism is not that. Communism is a workers' government, and that government decided through a somewhat oligarchical system of inner party politics, but nonetheless one that's selected through some, often when it's Marxist-Leninist, obtuse bureaucracy process. Bureaucracy is the word. The local elections that select people who select less local representatives, who select less local representatives. I've explained those issues, the elections, because not having opposition parties in them, but there is still what would essentially qualify as a nomination process, so there is still competition of candidates for who gets people's votes. The problem is that all those candidates belong to a single party, but there were historically often as many as 12 candidates for every seat. Just in the meetings that preceded the general election, kind of, if you think of it as nomination process and general election, if you had, for every seat, if the U.S. had been a communist country, it would have been, for every House representative seat, there'd be 12 people running for the nomination of the party. And then the general election, there would be that candidate, and it would just be yes, no vote. So it's still competitive. The problem is people can't run as the candidate if they've been purged from the party, and not everyone was a member of the party in the Soviet Union. So if someone had been removed from the party, they weren't allowed to run. That was one of the problems. And so, like the Great Purge, some people ended up dead in that, but many were just removed from the party rolls, and so they weren't allowed to ever run for office unless they were readmitted, which was a process that happened. Some people were readmitted, but this idea of it meant everyone was shot is a lie, although there were people who were shot summarily because there were two things happening in parallel: people being removed from the party rolls, and then people being investigated for treason, which, depending on the outcome of the investigation, it could result in people being found innocent. A lot of people actually were found innocent, although not as many should have been. There was a lot of witch hunting. People being found guilty of minor offenses and removed from the party, or people being found guilty of major offenses and sent to prison, or in some cases killed extrajudicially by the secret police, which is a huge problem. Not everyone who died in the Great Purge died by legal means, but some did. Some went to trial and, were found guilty of doing things like blowing up railroads and were shot by firing squad for literally planting bombs on railroads. Is one of the crimes that happened that was investigated. But then some people were sent to the prison and died because of spreading propaganda pamphlets that spoke out against Stalin, which that should not have been something that led to death. So I think many people can agree that blowing up railroads, which could literally kill people if it derails a train, that's a capital offense, but not spreading propaganda pamphlets. Of course, they were sent to prison. The problem is the prisons had bad conditions. Not as bad as is claimed, but marginally worse than prisons in the U.S. today, which are some of the worst prisons in the world. In the developed world today, you can find worse ones in like El Salvador, which is why Trump is sending people there. But he has to send people to freaking El Salvador because there are very few countries that have worse prisons than the United States. They're only very poor countries. But the Soviet prisons were worse in death rates. Of course, prison sentences were actually shorter. In the U.S., a crime that would get you sent to the gulags for 7 years with a higher death rate might get you sent these days to prison for 15 years, and you're actually less likely to survive that 15-year sentence because the death rates aren't that much lower in U.S. prisons. Of course, that's a combination of U.S. prisons, and there are countries with amazing prisons with very low death rates, like modern Finland, Norway, Sweden. You go to prison there, you're going to survive. You're not going to die of like poorly treated medical conditions or getting shivved the way you will in a U.S. prison, which happens all the time. It's essentially, well, the U.S. prison system is in some ways worse than the gulags were. Which is, again, not saying the gulags weren't terrible, but people don't realize how bad U.S. prisons are. They feed prisoners slop that barely qualifies as food. They practically encourage the prisoners to shiv each other. In fact, sometimes prison guards will actively encourage the gangs to keep prisoners divided so they don't do prison riots. They are forced to do unpaid labor that's basically slave labor. It is one of the worst prison systems on earth, especially in the deep south, Texas, Louisiana, very bad prisons in the U.S. This is partly due to the legacy of Jim Crow, though. As their forces have advanced into Texas, they've come across a large number of sympathetic citizens who have long harbored hidden sympathies. Probably African Americans are sick of segregation and know that I'm trying to get rid of it. By the way, Henry Aggood Wallace, one of the things he fought for with the Progressive Party in his 48 run was to end segregation. Would have ended it in like 48, 50 instead of when it really happened in the 60s, 70s. Because while laws were passed in the late 60s, it took a while for them to really be enforced. Swept up in a wave of patriotic fervor, they've asked to join our military. Integrate them into the army. I'll need to put Texas needs a lot of rifles, so I'm gonna actually override the state, put it on civilian oversight, no, local police force, so that you earmark enough of the rifles right from the beginning. I'll need better than local police force in the long run, but I'll need a secret police. But I don't actually need fully supplied secret police. Under-equipped secret police will do. Sunk a Confederate sub trying to sink my convoys. And Arleigh Burke didn't get experience in that? He should have been the guy too. Oh, 3 in blockade runners, so he just didn't get enough anything else. But it was Burke who led the battle. Which is good. Eventually might be a screening expert for my Navy if I end up in a very focused naval war. The UK joins the Axis, I'll need them, probably. Especially because I'm focusing less on my Navy than the multiplayer run, where I have the luxury of that, because Mexico isn't hostile there like it is here. I mean, Joe might do a little phony war of sorts if he nationalizes oil. Me invading so that the UK doesn't puppet his entire country, because they will attack him as well, even though they're communist, and they'll try and puppet his entire faction. So it's better that I invade him, quickly capitulate him, and maybe like create a independent state in Sonora and supervise in Baja. Then that, and because then he surrendered, then the UK has to get whatever they can with the war score they have at that point, rather than the UK overrunning all of Latin America. That's the way he can nationalize the oil fields, because UK will attack him. So I should say it's the way he can do it without his entire faction ending up controlled by the British. Cool. And it's a way to produce extra build slots at the same time through manipulating the creation of generic focus trees. The cost is then you can't do Royal Dutch Shell, which actually produces oil out of thin air, adds oil to Huila, but there's no way to do it with nationalizing oil fields when theoretically they should be. Maybe it should just cost, Civ. It should be more expensive, but it's not like Pemex was incapable of making the investments to expand oil production. Especially, say, if the U.S. is willing to help them with it. Give them technology exchange and such. All right. These guys need to go somewhere. Stick them here. Maybe they'll open up a little more width in this fight. Eventually. Since this is a 32 width and there's only 28 width available, so having this division flank would help. 24 width, so yeah. I could have this and this division both attack without going over width. Alright. Oh yeah, I forgot there was something over here, wasn't there? Yeah, I was gonna have these guys supporting attack on Valve. Supporting, they'll help them cross the river, because they won't have to cross the river here. It's not like I want MacArthur to become an engineer. He's never gonna get enough XP anyways. With all the other traits he's working on. I want throwaway lives just to cross the river extra times. The 61st Infantry break off the attack because their breakthrough value sucks and they're suffering crits. 11th Infantry. You know what? Oop. It'll only take 1 day for them to reach regular. No, I'm not going to lose all that work. I'll have them advance. And they can maybe attack these as something later. And they'll probably reach regular just through combat XP gain. They're not taking many hits. But dealing them. This guy's advanced here. Should have done that before. seem to be any defenders, so it's worth it. Battle of Little Rock. Good. These guys are probably preparing to join this battle eventually. So 19th Infantry can reorganize towards the end of the battle. Really? Not enough rifles for garrisoning Texas? Should have enough in the stockpiles unless it stupidly gave Mao as reinforcements. Probably just they're on their way to Texas. I hope that's the case. Oh, they were M1s. Shoot, that's why. Dear. Well. 323 rifles, and I produce almost 5 a day. So yeah, Springfields will just go right to Texas. Turning a single extra division to garrison Phoenix. I should do here because here because it's going to be attacked from 2 directions. Here because defense bonuses. I want to make sure the most experienced divisions are in the areas where I'm least likely to be able to hold. So there's no weak points in the line to break. Anyhow, these guys already have enough Springfield rifles. They just need to train. Future Springfields are all going to Texas for garrison duty. I want to note on this template, eventually I'll do a row of probably armored cars or light tanks. This is from before they increased the cost of light tanks, so people would stop using them for garrisons instead of armored cars. In Graveyard of Empires, that's not the case. You want to use armored cars again a lot of the time for garrisons if you have the tech, or you'll have less advantage of using light tanks anyhow. Armored cars were also buffed in combat, so they can be used as a kind of cheaper tank for where you can't even afford light tanks, or so you have more divisions of them quicker. Which there's always an argument for having your divisions ready sooner and fighting and taking ground instead of waiting for better troops. So this is older version of the game because save compatibility. So these guys are rotating back into here. 10 hours. Don't have that much org. Haven't even replaced all the losses, but they're a well-equipped division, so I will want that equipment back. I suppose there's a lot of width here. Alright, I'm missing the 15th Infantry here as well. And Bradley both for consistency and because even Bradley's divisions are suffering crits quite often. And this is a tough combat. 3 Nazi divisions, all very well equipped and trained. I say train. Yeah, they're all regulars. So, yeah, they sent their best divisions. Most of the army isn't nearly that good, but they sent elite divisions to try and swing this war against me, because that would mean a fascist USA that would join the Axis if somehow the Confederates won. They do eventually go fascist. They win. Huh. Unopposed in San Antonio. I'll make Bradley be done auto-executing this plan. Wait, I didn't control San Antonio, and I control Texas. Weird. 54-9. Well, I still want the supply hub. Really need the supply hub. It'll be a while till the railroad's converted, fixed, I guess, since the gauges shouldn't realistically be different. Now this is a bit slow. I won't cope him often tired. Don't get mad at me, folks. Seriously, this... You don't want to see videos this slow. Bug politicians have asked to cure for long COVID, so, you know, they get better. Or treatments, because the cure might take a while, but treatments, you know, if there's treatments that can ameliorate the effects, you know, if I'm still doing these videos, then I'm not, you know, back to work if I'm well enough at that point then. I guess it would depend on a lot of things. I'd probably reapply the graduate program I was in that I wasn't able to finish because I got sick, disabled. If they let me in on their not written, unfortunately, promised to let me back in if I got better. And the classes I was in progress that they didn't say, oh, well, we can't give you a withdrawal because it's 2 a semester, so we're giving you Fs in these classes. They didn't have a policy of allowing changing, giving a little bit of a way, but known as a retroactive withdrawal policy. Most universities in the U.S. have it, which is why I don't want to really, I'm not sure if I should say this because it narrows down where I went, but this university did not have a retroactive withdrawal policy, so they screwed me over. On that, they said they had no choice. They couldn't just, I'm like, change the policy. The university should clearly have a retroactive withdrawal policy. Most universities have it specifically for situations like this, where someone gets like a car accident or a family member dies, or they get disabled due to an illness partway through a semester, but too late to withdraw normally. It's retroactive because it gets around normal deadlines of withdrawing from classes. You know, I was on the road to having straight A's in these classes, but a lot of the weighting of the grade was the final project, and it was you must do a final project or fail. So they kind of situation. Plus, I initially know I wouldn't get better, so I did extensions, which say if you don't get put by the state, fail you. But otherwise, some of these classes would have theoretically been like B's. Just doing very, very well in these courses because I was doing very, very well in grad school until I got disabled long COVID. Which at least turned out to be a godsend with dealing with family. Some of them try to say, oh, it's all in your head, or you're just lazy, and other families are like, he didn't just go from being a straight A student to suddenly not able to complete courses. Come on, that doesn't just happen. But there's some very toxic people I'm related to who seem to think anyone disabled is faking it. I mean, literally, that's how toxic some of the people the slightly higher, but still on the floor bar of if someone is unable to get out of bed because their energy is so low many days, they really are sick, and you should show some empathy. That extremely low bar, only some of the people I'm related to pass. Uh, but some people have come around. They've seen, among other things, as I've lost more and more weight because of the digestive issues come along COVID, and when they didn't believe I was sick before and they saw that I'm like surely up to nothing even though I'm eating, I started to get a clue, because that's the problem with long COVID is it's an invisible disease until it starts to become visible with things like weight loss. Or at times I've almost looked like a cancer patient with how thin I've been, and I like eat like a zillion calories to try and stem that. For a little while I put some of it back, but I just keep losing weight because there's serious digestive issues going on even when I'm on a special diet to reduce that. So, you know, my life is a risk with this disease, and the government's not doing shit to try and cure it. In fact, Trump is cutting the medical research budget in half. Lovely. Capitalism and decay. Some assholes are called corporatism, but corporations have always been a part of capitalism. This is not corporatism or corporocracy or whatever bullshit libertarians want to say. This is late stage capitalism. This is what capitalism will always reach as it's failing in the end. The name is obviously a parallel to late stage cancer, and intentionally. The ideology of cancer is the ideology of the ideology of capitalism is the ideology of cancer. Infinite growth without respect to limits, such as limits of the environment, hence climate change, global warming. Capitalism cannot remain stable if the economy doesn't grow, by which I mean tendencies like mergers, acquisitions, increasing income inequality get much, 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 much worse if the economy is stagnant, which leads to capitalism becoming so unsustainable socially that there will be a revolution. The ruling class know this, which is why the economy must always grow. This is why people try and explain that while the growth isn't inherent just to capitalism, capitalism is addicted to growth at all costs, because otherwise the ruling elites will have to make concessions or the whole system will collapse. It's not possible to sustain capitalism, at least not neoliberal capitalism with weak welfare systems and stuff, without constant, fast economic growth. And indeed, the growth is not fast enough to make it sustainable in the US. This does remind me of a game, pretty shitty game, Realpolitik, but if you do what's essentially a neoliberal capitalist approach, where you have low interventionism score, which the game is very biased in favor of neoliberal capitalism, but it does represent this factor accurately, in that if you don't intervene in the economy, it's not the interventionism score directly, although it was supposed to have effects. It didn't. The coding was probably at the last minute change, but there's things you can take that will reduce unemployment by increase interventionism. If you don't take those things and your GDP growth isn't high enough, then unemployment will get higher and higher and higher, even though your economy is growing, because corporations are increasing productivity, they're laying off workers because the amount of capital is not growing fast enough that with higher productivity you can still employ the same number of people. The size of the capital pool has to be bigger to employ the same number of people if productivity is higher. In many cases, if productivity is growing through things like automation, they're more capital intensive. It's productivity just because you're organizing people better than fine. Doesn't need to lead to layoffs, but it's because you're buying expensive machines. They're more expensive than what you had before. It does. And actually, Marx predicted this, like many things. He talked about specifically the tendency of needing to buy ever more expensive machines and how that would lead to capitalism being addicted to growth and a declining rate of profit, because no matter how much you're growing, if the growth rate is increasing year after year, it's not going from 3 to 4 to 5%, then what's going to happen is the ratio of all the accumulated capital of companies versus what they can manage to achieve in a year in profit, mind you, not growth, but profit, it's going to get worse and worse. You're going to have what's known as declining rate of profit, which statistics, after some economists figured out how to actually measure the rate of profit, not actually all that many years ago, for a long time it was thought to be unmeasurable, has been proven that once this method was applied, proven that it's been declining year after year after year in the United States and most Western countries. And that ultimately limits the rate of GDP growth and will lead to it declining, leveling off. And that ultimately means that capitalism is not sustainable. It's just going to take longer than Marx predicted to collapse on itself. Social democracy can prolong the life of capitalism because the lower GDP growth rate is sustainable under social democracy. People have generous welfare systems, they're less likely to rebel, even if they're unemployed. But ultimately, things like mass unemployment are going to lead to either fascism or socialism taking over. You can do a universal basic income to try and prevent it, but that's only going to get you so far. The Saratoga. Design. Why did it always send over 10? Oh, because it breaks off 10 at a time. So if I click again, there, 10 more. I click again, 10 more. Okay, that's it. You know what? Because the way sorties work, I'll save these for the Lexington also. I like to try and keep the number of aircraft relatively even on each. So, capitalism will collapse like Marx predicted. It just might take way longer than he thought it would. Of course, World War II added a lot of lifetime to how long capitalism had. They could keep going because it destroyed a lot of capital. And actually what kills capitalism in the end is too much accumulated capital. That's an ironic thing. But when the rate of profit becomes too low, because work has become too highly automated, and to further automate requires even more massive investments, ever more massive investments. So if you have a war that wipes out enormous amounts of machinery, strategic bombing and such, then you set the clock back. But I don't think anyone would advocate that we should have a world war every so often just to prevent the collapse of capitalism, although it does seem to be what the ruling elites of the world are striving for. I guess any sane person would argue for that, but it seems an awful lot like the ruling elites of like the US and the more belligerent countries in Europe. Maybe they're not actively gunning for World War III, but they don't seem to mind the possibility. Maybe that's because they know it'll add lifetime to neoliberal capitalism before they're forced to make concessions to working class to not have a revolt on their hands. Of course, there's also efforts to expand and improve surveillance technology and systems of oppression to the point where I think they can get away with not doing any concessions like higher wages and better working conditions, because people won't be able to ever successfully rebel if killer robots will just mow them down, drones and such. All right. I'm almost an hour and a half here, so I'm starting to look around and see what I'm missing. But my brain's not working so great, and I'm just getting into tangents that probably aren't that interesting to you guys. Right. These guys are fully organized. I'm joining the attack. March normally, because I think you need at least one division that's marching and not doing a supporting attack. And other division, the 8th Infantry, I want to pull so they can replan and such, and reorganize. So that once they take this province, all 4 fully organized divisions and go right in here. At least more even between the two of them. Whereas if I take it with like one highly organized and one less organized division, then I'll have to wait for them both to organize if an attack somewhere it's heavily defended. Alright. Well, that'll do. I hope you folks enjoyed the video. Take care of each other. Be kind to yourselves. And may you always find a guiding star to lead you home. Until next time, this is Northstar. Adieu, and best luck.